So essentially I'm going to talk about a simulation program we've developed called VISIOT, and I'm going to talk about how we've done a very basic proof of concept study here in the UK and the USA, and why we've done that will become apparent hopefully as I go through the slides. So communication in the operating theatre is actually really problematic globally, and we spend a lot of time looking at the technical skills of individual team members. We look at the processes, the systems, the organisational factors, the environment. But actually I think the WHO said a few years ago, about 70 to 90% of the problems that occur in the operating theatre are down to communication. So really we're not looking into it enough. And it's something that's quite complex, and that's probably why as well. It results in most errors and near misses, actually, is what has been said. And we all know that the WHO checklist has tried to address some of these things. However, obviously it's a bit kind of reductive in what it attempts to do. But it has improved certain aspects. We still need further interventions to improve it. It's crucial. And most of the research that has been done on communication in operating theatres tends to actually be either self-reported or people going with checklists with already predetermined ideas of what the communication issues are, and then we make decisions based on that, when actually we're not really just thinking about what are the communication issues. We're not exploring it, essentially. We're already deciding what we think it is. So a few years ago, I think it was back in 2012, myself and a few other, I'm a nurse by background, a couple of surgeons and some social scientists went into the operating theatre with camcorders for about 18 months, and we just filmed. And our framework was just communication between the team members. We weren't deciding or making any prejudgments on what the communication issues were. And what we actually found were really mundane things, very basic stuff, from the positioning of the scrub trolley to how responsive someone was to the request. The surgeon's requesting something. Can the scrub nurse respond effectively or not? Or does the circulator speak up and respond to a verbal request? So for example, the surgeon might say, "Suction please." The circulator's going to get the suction, but are they telling the surgeon they're doing that? Sometimes, often we found they weren't. So very mundane things that were happening, but actually cumulatively over time they built up these frustrations among the team members. There seemed to be this kind of sense of each team member felt that they were working with incompetent people, which wasn't the case. It was just this kind of miscommunication on very basic things. It's very hard to identify when you're working in the moment because you have other things on your mind, but because we had all these video recordings, we could keep looking and playing with them. So the study finished and we had huge amounts of outputs that were really interesting, but we wanted to do something with them because they were so mundane. It was a bit kind of like, well, how do you tell people to do things differently with these? And what we created was something called VISIOT, which stands for Video Supported Simulation of Interactions in the Operating Theatre. And what's unusual about this simulation training program is it's a team simulation training program. It's based on the empirical findings of the original research. So it's not just based on, it is a made-up scenario, but what we're trying to address and what our outcomes are based on those actual findings, which is quite unusual for team simulation training in surgery. And essentially how it kind of looks is, what we have is a very basic laparotomy. It's a blunt trauma to the abdomen. The patient comes in, they've got a bleed, but nothing bad happens. It's very straightforward. Which someone's saying about just the previous presentation, about actually if you've got previous experience with simulation you do better. We found that was problematic because what was happening with us is we would have healthcare professionals, the team come in, and they're expecting it to be an emergency simulation because that's what they were used to, and we didn't want it to be an emergency. And even down to, we had an anaesthetist who was controlling the anaesthetic machine of what would happen. And he was like, well, nothing's happening, we need to make something happen, and kept playing around with the patient, and then the anaesthetist would get all stressed, and we were like, no, this is a straightforward procedure, as most procedures are. So that was quite problematic for us. But what would happen is we want this straightforward procedure where they'd all work together, and what they didn't know is we had several imposters in the room who were implementing some of our findings, And we were also assessing to see if some of our findings were happening. So things like, are the circulators responding vocally to the surgeon? Is music being played? And we'd turn music up really loud and see how the team reacted to that, because that was one of our outcomes as well. Where does the scrub nurse position themselves in order to interact with the team effectively? So very mundane things. Once they'd finished the scenario, we'd then take them into a debriefing room, but this time we wouldn't look at what they did. We knew what they did, but we wouldn't look at that. We'd look at clips of the real operating theatre that we had acquired, and the clips are anything from 10 seconds to about 2 or 3 minutes, and they were just pinpointing these mundane instances. And what was great about that is that, first of all, you don't get the, well, this would never happen in real life, I would never do that normally situation, because it's taken away from them, but you give them a chance to reflect on these things that are happening routinely in operating theatres. And then we also get them to strategise for the teams in the videos. Well, how could they do this better? So simple things, then they could come up with whatever they wanted. They then take those strategies, we go back in, we do the exact same scenario, and that gave us data as well, which isn't what this presentation is about, but we have further data on whether that made any changes or differences. So here's just some picture. This is in America, where we were undertaking the US one. High fidelity, simulated operating theatre, the machines work, everything works. We have a very fancy model that we've had designed especially for this training programme. And you might be thinking, well, if it's about communication, why do you need a model? It's not about technical skills. But what we found with most surgical simulations is that the surgeons have nothing to do. The anaesthetists have a really high-tech machine. The nurses will have, you know, all their instruments, etc., but the surgeons won't often have something very good within the communication, within the simulation for communication. So they're stood there doing perfect communication because there's nothing to get stressed about or to interact with the rest of the team. So this model, there's a blood pump that goes just in here, and basically there's a small just a small bit of tubing, which is where the bleed occurs. So there's also skin that goes over the top. So they start the operation, the patient's draped up, they can go in, they can cut through, it's like silicone skin, it's got several layers. They go through that, they find the bleed, they walk the bowel, clamp it, tie it off, and then stitch up. But that provides just enough pressure that it's not about an emergency so much, but it provides enough pressure that they're constantly having to work with the rest of the team to get the right swabs, the right instruments, check with the anaesthetist, so that everyone is working together. So it's quite crucial and quite important part of it. So, 2 minutes, I better be quick. So what we just want to do is, we knew that these communication problems are problematic globally, and we'd run this training course in the UK quite successfully. But we want to see if it would work in the States as well, and if that would kind of provide us evidence about the applicability of it on a larger scale, and to determine if there was any differences that were needed, how it was received in the US and the UK. So basically our questions were, what is the response to the training in terms of the design, education, content, satisfaction and self-confidence, and how important is each aspect to participants? Are there any differences between the professions? And are there any differences between the countries? We had to go with a convenient sample because, as you can imagine, it's very difficult to get teams together anyway, which was fine for us, we did that. We had UK and US based teams. We used pre-existing validated instruments, and we also had a questionnaire of open feedback so that we could get some qualitative data. And we use different types of analysis for the different questions, which I won't go into now. Basically, in total, we only run 8 surgical simulations, but these simulations are a full half-day long, so they're quite intensive, and it's more about the quality rather than the quantity. We only had 2 in the UK because we had some big problems in the end, which was unfortunate. We would have had more, but we had 37 participants in total, and that was from all levels. So we had consultant surgeons, consultants anaesthetists, to trainees and scrub nurse and scrub techs. All aspects of the course were highly rated. There were some significant difference interestingly, between whether they thought the perception of the course and whether that was important to them or not, and that was in the debriefing course evaluation. The participants didn't seem to think that debriefing and course evaluation was important. or aspects of the course were important, but that might be an indicator that actually it all ran really well, and that they were just more excited about the doing rather than the other processes around it. I'll go on quickly here. So some of the qualitative stuff we had was, I like this quote at the bottom. So this is from one of the surgeons in the US. We got to discuss issues that repeatedly occur in the OR and aren't usually addressed appropriately. Moreover, we got to appreciate different points of view and reactions to the same situation based on our current roles in the OR. I think it definitely made me more aware of situations and uncomfortable, unsuitable situations that can be easily remedied and fixed. I would make the course a good part of any training programme for personal working in the OR. So there was this sense that they all kind of started to understand each other's perspective and the difficulties, and they could talk about it without being defensive because it wasn't about something they'd just done. So in conclusion, we were able to develop some information on the practical developments of the course in terms of technology, recruitment, course design. Evidence of the course's applicability in the USA, everything they saw in the videos, they said we have exactly the same problems. These mundane communication issues aren't unique to the UK. They recognise them instantly, every time. And we do need further studies. So we've also, as part of this study, there's lots of other data that we've collected, but we're also now in the process of gaining further funding. We've just had some funding actually come through to turn this into more of a commercial product, not so much to commercialise it, but so that we can actually get more people using it and we can collect more data. So sorry, that was really rushed, but I hope it made sense.
Thank you very much.